how to rebuild a dimension of trust in Europe. The city to come, how to reduce gaps and social inequalities in territories. The economy to come, what kind of state and with what goals for reconstruction, investment, and visions. The labor to come, what proposals for an inclusive employment market. The politics to come, what kind of progressive policies for a new season of reforms. We need trajectories, credible proposals, and trust to relaunch the pivotal values of the European community: inclusion, pluralism, equity, and solidarity. To sustain fragilities within a context of transformation. 4 steps in 4 major European cities. What kind of cities to come for Europe? What kind of employment and rights to come for Europe? What kind of Europe will we build between technocracies and populism? Ecological transition. Is it hype or is real change coming? Multi-stakeholder workshops and open forums with experts, practitioners, grassroots communities, international speakers, and policymakers. For listening, harnessing, and sharing active solutions. OkEurope. Know-how, experiences, and energies for redrafting the pact between citizens and institutions, local needs, and a project of integration. Let's plan it together. Let's do it together.
So, good evening and welcome at OkEurope, a project by Fondazione Giangiacomo Feltrinelli. Tonight we are going to spend 1 hour together with Wolfgang Merkel, with Rahel Süß and Michael Pachmajer. But we will start with Lorenzo Monfregola. The OkEurope project is all about Europe and about the trust in institutions and how we can increase the trust in the European vision and how to accelerate the integration project in Europe. These are the topics of today's workshop that we will discuss together with Merkel, Süß and Pachmajer after Lorenzo's speech. But this is the last and 4th meeting within the framework of the OkEurope Forum. So you saw we had a meeting in Barcelona in September, Paris in October, and in Brussels. But today we have a meeting in Berlin that was supposed to be live, but we had to organize this meeting online for clear reasons. But we can start right now with Lorenzo. Lorenzo, you have the floor.
Great, so
it's nice to know all of you, but considering that the report is in English, I will speak in English.
Do you hear me? Io vi sento, sì, sto aspettando. Okay, so I will talk now in English. Everybody's hearing me. Can you remove the translation from my... That's the problem right now. Okay, so again, guten Abend. Die Präsentation und die Artikel, die ich geschrieben habe, sind auf Englisch. Deshalb werde ich jetzt meinen kurzen Beitrag auf Englisch halten. We have a presentation, a very short presentation. And so the point of the presentation is just to introduce how Germany is coping with the Energiewende, so the great energetic change, the great green transition in Germany. But as you may know, I wrote a reportage for Fondazione Feltrinelli that has to do much more with how the social impact of the green transition will impact the German society and or the entire European society. What I did is a reportage about the first steps. I just posed some questions, and these questions are still open. We are really on the first steps of asking ourselves what's going to happen in European societies with a great green transition. So I introduced the presentation by Fondazione Feltrinelli. We have a couple of numbers here. You know that a few months ago, the Constitutional Court in Germany ruled that the efforts by the German government were not enough to protect the rights, were violating the rights of the younger generations. So we have now a new Klimaschutzgesetz, and by 2045, the country intends to achieve climate neutrality. This will be changed also by the next government, but it is clear that the green dossier is now at the center of the table of the next government, of the next German government. We know all these data. I think everybody knows them, but the goal is to reduce CO emissions by 65% in 2030 and by 88% in 2030, and then to reach climate neutrality in 2045. We know there is a new program, just one of them that was decided in June, of 8 billion euros for the climate emergency in Germany. And we know also some complex topics, like that the German electricity is, for example, very, very expensive right now. We also know this has not to do only with the green change, and there are many other issues on the table in this dossier. We know there is a lot of geopolitical stuff going on, but at the moment we have this scenario where Germany has actually the highest electricity prices, or had it at least in 2020. And I worked a lot in my reportage on a concept called Energiearmut. This is energy poverty. Usually we talk about energy poverty when a household spends more than 10% of its income in energy. So this is something we really have to keep in our mind when we look at the direct and short-term effects of a green transition in the society. And on the other side, writing about how Germany is entering in the great green change, we know that a great majority, a great vastity of Germans are in favor of the expansion of renewable energy, for example, 86%. And we all know almost everybody does agree with the Energiewende, and with changing the way of life in a much more greener way. Nevertheless, we will have to see what happens when this change will really happen in the next years, and how this will impact the opinions of many citizens. Climate and environment were very important in the last elections. But then we have the question if there is a just transition or not. This is just a question. I don't have an answer for that. You will be able to read my reportage on the website of Fondazione Feltrinelli. For example, this is one of the voices I collect. I've been collecting voices, especially in Marza Nord, which is a neighborhood I've been working for some time now. Is the neighborhood with the Plattenbau, and where there is a very high concentration of people who are living on welfare. And the voices are sometimes harsher on the green transition, and I've been investigating what is the relationship between the ecological turn and, for example, also the world of work, not only the world of welfare. And I would say, and I keep now telling you then to read the reportage because I want to be really, really short. I would say up until 10 years ago, the ecological turn was automatically linked with social issues. But now that we are entering in a new era also of industrial green productivity and industrial productivity that is oriented to the Green Deal, we will have many questions about the social side of the green transition. This is, for example, this is a very, very easy testimony from someone in Marsa Nord that was complaining about how the electricity is getting the prices are raising, and the person couldn't even explain how this works, and actually it's really complex, and it's also not that true that it's actually the energy vendor that is pushing the prices, but this is something that is happening, and this is something that really has to be controlled, especially, and you will see it in the reportage, on the side of how in this social conflict or in social contradictions, for example, right-wing populism will try to insert itself. We already see something like that, and we really have to analyze really how this could happen further in the next years. And another point I would like to stress out is that this right-wing populism has also a lot to do with the geopolitical profile and geopolitical aspect of the energy transformation and the new Green Deal, and this is something also that we really have to deeply analyze. We have to do a 360-degree analysis on that, because also if we will start to see a very special dynamic between internal policy when it comes to the new Green Deal and geopolitical big players. This is something I invite you again to read the article. And we are facing really an epochal passage in a situation that has enormous possibilities, but also extreme risks. So from my side, the reportage was just the first step in this scenario. This is a very complex scenario where a lot of people have to give their democratic choice about something that is really complex to understand, for example, and there is a lot of stake, and there is a lot of really important dossiers that will be now managed in the new Green Deal. When we go back to Germany, for example, we can think about what will happen in the auto industry and how this will affect the social structure in Germany. So again, now I'm really keen to hear whoever speaks after me. From my side, the reportage, I invite you to read it. You can come back to me with questions in the next days, whoever wants. But as I said, it was the first step in the contradictions that can can develop inside an ecological transition that doesn't look enough on its social side. From my side, I would say we still have one, but those are simply quotes that come from the many different professors and people I talk to. And yeah, that's all from my side.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lorenzo Monfregola. And we will continue with Wolfgang Merkel. He will talk about capitalism and the capitalist state. But we do not have a capitalism in Germany. So, but he focuses a lot on this topic, and we will talk about this much more in detail. You will focus on the historical aspect. So about the structure of the capitalist state and the impact on Europe. Wolfgang, you have the floor. There is a question that we have to ask. How can we become CO2 neutral, climate neutral, and continue to produce? And at the same time, how can we manage the social aspect? So I have a task which is very general, and I'm not going to talk a lot about capitalism. However, I continue to focus on this concept, and so the Anglo-Saxon world mentions a lot the word capitalism, but we have to consider that we have to do with a variety of capitalism forms, and there are very interesting variants that also have to do with the climate issue. I will focus on different forms, and I will try and focus on the concept of state and on the limits of the government and the governance. We have seen that in philosophy, in practice, but also in law in the past centuries, there has been a sort of metaphor. So the use of the word building, a building, the state was compared with a building with 5 floors. So the lower floor includes sort of, the problem, the general problem, and this is the foundation of the building. The lowest floor, which is the welfare state, and this was in the 17th century. And then we have another floor, which is the protection of security rights through parliament and through the rule of law. And this represents the 18th century. The third floor is democracy and the implementation of democracy through voting rights in the second half of the 19th century. The fourth floor is social security by the state, the welfare state. In this case, we can use the word welfare state as a social state. And in this case, it's not in Bismarck's state, as previously said, but actually the universality of safeguarding social rights. And this, and with that, we are in the 20th century with the Beveridge Report. The fifth floor includes the ecological state. In this case, it is all about the protection of the environment, of the climate, and this is basically what we can read in the report of the Club of Rome in the 1970s. And the roof is, let's say, regulations in the first, second, and third floor are okay, but in practice, we can say that these floors were not built so solidly by the member states and other states. The fourth floor, the social protection, was somehow demolished in different parts, and so we have different regulations according to the different countries. And in the fifth floor, which lays on a fragile building, this is at the beginning because it includes all the questions and issues that Lorenzo mentioned. One point is important. This state exists only in theory, because in practice we have again a variety of states, and they are able or not to execute these functions. I have a couple of theses. The second thesis is that the state in the 21st century is not able to fulfill its function fully. So we have to depart from the idea that the democratic and political system or the state is superior to all the other social systems. So we have to depart from the idea that we can control all the other systems through Geld and through money and power, because these other systems and levels exist. And social sciences are very skeptical because they know that there are external powers, external rules, there are ties and constraints that can reduce the possibilities provided by the state. The third thesis is the weakness of the state that is particularly visible in the 21st century, especially in light of the climate crisis. We do not want to focus on conspiration, but the democratical state has different goals and different functions to fulfill. And one of these is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and this is urgent, as we heard, but this goes against economic growth with markets, with health and social issues. And these multiple objectives of the state and this weakness of the state will be especially challenged within the framework of the great transformation that our industrial states are about to fulfill. The fourth thesis, the veto situation, and within the framework of this transformation, sometimes against the enemies of the transformation. On the one hand, we have social groups, demonstrations, political parties, but also the Chamber of Parliament and some courts are trying to pursue their own interests and their own rules and regulations, and they become important veto actors against the state. In Germany, for example, there are Fridays for Future social movements or political parties such as the Green Party that are leading to fighting against global warming. Then we have trade unions, we have industrial associations and right-wing parties that are trying to exacerbate the social issue. Last but not least, the climate crisis, which is not a national but a global problem, and global crisis can be solved only at a global level. And this is the discussion that we have been having for a long time, in Germany at least. We have realized that the crisis cannot be solved within the borders of our country. And then we come to the last thesis. In the COVID crisis that we are still experiencing, a question about systems arose. Can the authority of systems cope in a better way with such problems in a democracy? Well, in the framework of the pandemic, this competition is still open. In the climate crisis, we can hardly say that authoritative systems are much worse than democratic systems, especially in terms of feedback of citizens towards the state. So again, this feedback mechanism that citizens fulfill with their support or with their needs towards the government, and the idea that they can impact on the government. Well, in the best case scenario, they can act in a more responsible way, and they can lead to a more responsible government. And this applies both to periods of turbulence and to normal periods. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have already heard Lorenzo's contribution, Wolfgang, but we also have Rahel Süß, a political theorist from the Humboldt University, Berlin, and finally, Pachmajer from the University of Potsdam. Rahel, you should now describe what is possible right now and what we can change. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good evening. I already had a meeting previously, and I'd like to thank Wolfgang Merkel for his very nice presentation. In my speech, I will try and understand in which direction states should move in order to speed up the ecological transition. And in particular, the argument that I wanted to point out is that the ecological transformation needs a radical democratization process. And what do I mean by radical democratization? With radical democratization, I mean, that we should not have a veto process with votes, but we should opt for more freedom and also for more solidarity, so that these principles are applied to social aspects such as the healthcare sector, the social sector, etc. The consequences of such a democratic approach is that the ecological transformation can be perceived as a radical transformation. It must be radical because it must go into the roots of this process. In practice, we have to do everything so that we can reduce the impact of climate change, but this would also mean that the ecological issues have to be combined with social issues and distribution issues as well. And this implies racism and other issues such as intergenerational justice. If we reflect upon the direction that the state should go in order to pursue a real ecological transition, we have to consider that the state should work isolated from other social dimensions. Ecological dimensions must be tackled together with other social issues. And so we have to resort we do not have to resort to strategies that cannot lead to a radical change. Instead, we have to go back to Hannah Arendt and to the idea of a new beginning, and to keep the spirit of a new beginning alive. And Hannah Arendt said the ability of beginning from new again is very important. And from an ecological viewpoint, we have, from a political and legal viewpoint, we have to be able to start again from scratch. In practice, considering the role of the state, we can act in three areas, and in the following discussions we can go into the details of this. On the one hand, we have to consolidate the welfare state and strengthen the role of the trade unions. On the other hand, we have to extend participation-based structures, and we have to involve multiple social stakeholders. And third, we have to opt for and to recognize the movements for climate justice. First of all, the establishment of the welfare state and the strengthening of the trade unions. What do we need today? Today, we need political intentions that combine climate protection with social issues, for example, the reduction of social injustice. Climate justice means that we need something more than taxes on CO2 emissions. We have to work also on minimum wages and to guarantee fair pensions. And we have also to guarantee a good healthcare system, but also investments in building and safeguarding households. As far as the strengthening of trade unions and the welfare state is concerned, the private sector is the real driver of innovation and of ecological transition, but also state-based activities are important. For example, the provision of finance for investments of private companies so that they can be competitive in the international scenario. But at the same time, state investments must be carried out in critical sectors where private investors are not reluctant to invest. Then, as far as the second pillar is concerned, we have to consider that the involvement of social stakeholders is important. In practice, for example, we have a good example in France. Last year, for example, proposals for a new law on the climate protection were proposed by the citizens. There was a referendum, and this year in summer, unfortunately, this project failed. But the idea is to create a sort of a third chamber made up of citizens in France. But besides the citizens' participation, we need participation-based technologies, for example, and we also need the involvement of social stakeholders, for example, through platform urbanism, through e-government and participative budgeting. What is important in this approach is that collaborative technologies are treated as a common asset, because the approach is to allow conversation and discussions on issues. In Barcelona, for example, there was a pilot project to give sensors to citizens so that they could measure pollution. But these technologies are also used for promoting exchange in solving problems. For example, how to use CO2 emissions in the field of carbon storage and how to invest. Then we have a third priority, the role of movements for climate justice and the recognition of these movements. The idea is that we cannot wait for politicians or for carbon market mechanisms that they solve this problem for us. And we have so many movements that make this approach visible, and they point out that politicians do not want to give up their privileges. So in the history of democracy, demonstrations and protests have always been important for strengthening the democratization process. And so we have to remember that climate politics is a very unjust approach where every single stakeholder tries to defend its own interests. And COP26, the conference, has highlighted this aspect. 10,000 people have protested against the carbon colonialism, and this protest was also against the government of the wealthier countries of the Northern Hemisphere, which are about to sell the rights of CO2 emissions. And so through, for example, CO2 compensation. Germany is one of the countries that is buying most of these certificates. And protests and demonstrations were also against the privatization and the commoditization of these resources without considering the local population and the local resources. those which defend global markets say that CO2 is much cheaper in the southern hemisphere, and so it is much better to buy them instead of implementing or investing money in CO2 compensation projects. But we have to consider that local compensation programs bring about some important advantages. On the one hand, they allow for local control and for responsibility. On the other hand, they highlight the geographical connection between the damage caused and their elimination. Finally, question. What is the direction that state should pursue in order to really speed up the ecological transformation process? Well, I can say that we all have to make clear that if we want to answer this question, first of all, we have to consider that the ecological transformation is a social transformation. We have to consider all the movements for climate change, and these imply that we have to preserve the spirit of a new beginning, as Anna Arendt said. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then and now Michael Pachmajer from the Humboldt University, Potsdam. I read about the difference between a planned economy and an economy that creates general conditions. It is important. Well, they are basically the same thing, because we need general conditions and we need a planning. Otherwise, we have a socialism. So what do we need? What are the imperatives to transform the government's decision-making schemes? Going back to the previous speaker, we have to wonder whether the ecological transition a hype or structural change is. And this is something that we have to consider, because this is a structural element that implies better strategies. If we, for example, consider the wind plants, for example, we had 6 years ago and we have now. Of course, we have many conflicts between the construction of these plants and, for example, mobility. So the question is, what is the governance, and what kind of governance should the state develop so that we can solve the problems we had in the past? Today, we talked about all these topics in our workshop with scientists, with people from the administration, and with experts in the field of participation, and from different areas of expertise. I noticed that there was an actor that was not present at all, although we need their participation. That is politicians, because politicians play a very important role in developing structures and policies at a state level. Well, of course, there are obstacles because they create double structures. And on the other hand, they need more co-creation. And so they need more cooperation. They need to overcome limitations and borders. We have to go beyond the personal interests. And this is the essence of the modern state. These are all the topics we discussed during this afternoon's workshop. And we discussed the imperatives that a state should develop in order to develop solutions within the framework of the ecological transformation and of the social transformation as well. And very quickly, we came up with the following idea. power conflicts must be visible to the citizens. So structures and decision-making processes must become transparent and visible. We need new forms with which people in and outside state institutions can be involved. In order for this involvement to take place, we can experiment with new forms of participation. But to do so, we should not do what we usually see. There are people who come with a fantastic idea, with great examples, very well formulated, but they cannot be put into practice because there is no interface with state decision makers, which can now and who can now lead to the following phase and who can implement these ideas. So we should not run the risk of starting a participative process with a greenwashing effect. We need to create the necessary interfaces in the institutions that must be defined very clearly. There are examples today, and today we discussed some of these items. For example, the strategy that was implemented in Berlin, and the idea is to involve the citizenship and the different actors of the society. But the ideas coming from the citizens could not be implemented properly because of failing interfaces. So state institutions must become quicker and more agile. It's not a question of making everything more agile. The great challenge that the administration will have to cope with in the future is that they have to be able to become twofold. On the one hand, they must keep their precision. On the other hand, there will be some issues and some situations where they need participation. And through these participative processes, they will be able to become much more agile. But in order for participation to occur, they need more agility. So on the one hand, we have within the same administration, we have two types of way of working. On the one hand, precision, on the other hand, experimentation. And the idea is to experiment and to test where innovation can occur through a participative process. I do not mean setting up new agencies or new institutions in the state or in the government. The idea is to experiment and to create a space for new ideas so that in these spaces, such as today's workshops, you can exchange your views and opinions with different specialists and experts, harnessing your own experience, and this will contribute to finding a solution to the problems. In conclusion, I'd like to mention two other points that we came up with during today's workshop. We need a vision of a modern state that can be communicated. In other words, we have to explain what do we mean by the vision, and we also need a picture, and those who have a vision must liaise with the administration so that the administration becomes attractive enough to support these new visions. Visions are important because they provide orientation to the government action. And so we need a very creative, a co-creative state. This is another imperative. Before moving on to the discussion, we need also capacity building. On the one hand, we need transformative skills and capacities to be embedded in the administration, and some of these are already present. And for those who already have these capacities, they must be activated, but at the same time, we can resort to the outside world to get these capacities and these skills so that in the future we can have more flexibility and more mutual work. These were some of the issues that we have discussed today during our workshop this afternoon. Thank you. Discussion now, a discussion about of the issues that you have described. Any new proposals? Something that, well, a new idea that we may not have found out so far. If I may, in these workshops, we are all perfectly aware of the problem. We can describe the problems very well. The problem is to find good role models, and we had even more difficulties to find structures where to start from. And in this respect, I think we should reflect upon this. So if we have so much knowledge, how can we use this? How can we use this knowledge that we have? That is, how can we work with other structures, with other governance forms? And how can we combine all this with the power structure of the state? And how can we find a solution between this dichotomy? Wolfgang. All this is very fascinating, and from a regulation viewpoint, I fully agree with Rahel, but I do not believe this is feasible. The Energiewende, the energy transition, and the great transformation we are about to face will strengthen capitalism. Well, and I'm saying so from a neutral viewpoint. So you mention a new wave of innovation that we hope will occur so that a long-term innovation cycle can start. But, well, and this goes back to Rahel's three ideas concerning the three political fields, the welfare state, the participation and social movements. Capitalism is creative as a process because it creates a new innovation wave that we need. We certainly need a new wave of innovation in order to comply with the Energiewende. But at the same time, we are going to have a social injustice, and social injustice will exacerbate. This is basically to be taken for granted, as we have seen in the past with previous crises. Michel said, we know so many things, but we can hardly do the things that we know. But it's not actually we. So it's basically the fiction whereby we all have a similar interest. That's true. We have to fight climate change, but we have different interests as we saw. So the protagonists of the Fridays for Future are totally different from other representatives of the society. We are going to have very harsh distribution wars and conflicts. And so we have no we from a social viewpoint, in particular in this moment when social cohesion is particularly fragile. And in this respect, I'm not considering the international scene. I'm focusing first on Germany, and Germany accounts for about 2% of the greenhouse emissions or even more. But we have to consider that the we is a plural form. The state is made up of multiple actors with different institutional interests. In other words, so we have to consider the state in the state that justice is different, that courts are different from administration, that parliament is something different from the government, as we could see during the pandemic. Rahel, do you want to react to this idea whereby capitalism is going to be stronger? And what about the radical transformation? Because what we heard is basically the opposite of what you said. So capitalism is going to be stronger and the power structures are going to become stronger too. The owners and those who are working for the owners are going to become stronger. How can you react to this statement? I fully agree with him because I fully agree. I can also see that there will be a strengthening of capitalism and we are going to see an exacerbation of social injustice. And for this reason, if we reflect upon the ecological transition, we must always start from the idea of the global climate justice. And we have to start from there. Otherwise, we run the risk of having a situation as the one mentioned by Wolfgang. There will be actors that become stronger and stronger, and the social injustice will be exacerbated. Global conflicts, as we discussed in the workshop, will increase. We are going to have new global conflicts in the framework of within the framework of the ecological transformation. And so who are the actors? The actors are those going onto the streets and protest, because in the field of democratization, social movements are very important. And in the history of democracy, social movements have always played a very important role. So my idea is not to wait for a reaction by the policymakers, by a free market, or maybe hoping that new technologies will solve the problem. We have to realize that we must find a solution, and we must convince people that we have to organize ourselves collectively to solve our issues. Well, this could be joining a trade union, joining a political party, going onto the streets and demonstrate. There are many different possibilities, but radical democratization in this respect means that we have all to be involved. Lorenzo, what can you say from Italy? Our processes are a bit more democratic than in Germany, and Extension Rebellion, Fridays for Futures, are they also in Italy? And Extension Rebellion is actually against capitalism, and our constitution protection is something against it.
Well, I think it's really hard to compare now the Italian movement and the German movement. I also think that the German movement and the entire debate on the Green Deal and on the key event in Germany is far more behind in Italy. I have to say this. We still are not talking about it like we are talking about it in Germany. The reasons are many. Of course, from a geopolitical point of view, Germany is a core player in the change that will happen. It's a core player in how the Green Deal, from a global point of view, will impact the relationship between other big players. If we think about the relation between the Green Deal in Germany and I don't know, the conflict and the coupling, technological decoupling between China and the US. Of course, we will talk, the German debate will have a very, very global profile in the near future. And I would say also that the rest of Europe will somehow follow or not follow the German debate. That's on the other side. I also think that the debate, the green debate in Germany, will be somehow a laboratory for the rest of Europe, and this especially for South Europe. I mean, if it won't work out pretty well in Germany, I can imagine it will not be followed or not be seen as a doable way also from Italy or from Spain or from other countries. Nevertheless, I know there are some very, very good best practices in Italy or in Spain, in Portugal, in the entire South European countries. But I really think that the big game will be played in countries like Germany and France. And from a political point of view, and this is a very personal opinion, I think that the big game will be played in Germany. And when it comes to the conflict between capitalism and the Green Deal, so the conflict between ecologism as an anti-capitalist point of view and the Green Deal as a new form of productivity and a new form of industrial organization of the society, I think Germany will be the core of this question. And as you said, this political clash is already there. And yeah, that's what I see from outside.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Wolfgang, do you want to say something? Well, final question for you, maybe. The strengthening of capitalism that we are foreseeing, is it inevitable, or can we actually dare some democratization in this framework? I have nothing against a stronger democracy. We should strengthen our democratization. I fear, however, that this has anything to do with ecology or with our problem, because if we consider democratization, we never find the social movements that are so nice to us, but these are usually movements for the rights, and so right populism and other demonstrations that account for a greater part of the population in Hungary. So we have the yellow vests. We are going to have other movements, and this is included in the democratization process, and this is forbidden in Italy, but this is a representation of the older brackets of society, and this is a problem because the right populism is an important element that we should not overshadow. But let me go back to what Lorenzo said, and this is one of the reasons why we had this debate in Germany right now. The debate gives the impression that we are the leaders in the fight against climate change. We're not. And secondly, the German formula will not heal the world. The US don't care about Germany. China too, and India will follow China and not Germany. So we have to keep the church in the village, and so we should not act as global players. But most importantly, we have to democratize, to pursue democratization, especially in this phase of capitalism that has to be restricted as far as possible through democratization. The democratization of capitalism is important. I've spent 20 years of my life reflecting upon this. The democratization of capitalism in a limited and a constrained world is much more difficult than in a national world, in a national state. We live in an endless world, and I think I can hardly believe that democratization is feasible. Who wants to close? I'm here in representation of the Co-Creation Foundation. So I think we have to reflect upon technologies that can be implemented in order to pursue this approach, because without infrastructure we cannot achieve this, and this has also been pointed out by COP26. So new techniques such as co-creation allow us to consider different perspectives so that within a process we can define and develop a solution that can be implemented. And this applies both to local and to national levels. Fridays for Future, for example, through a week-long process, they created a very important process, and they involved also politicians. And so they managed to grasp the attention of the parliament. And so why shouldn't this be possible at a European level too? It's only a question of coordinating this project, this process, and devised by people who have an idea about how to design these processes. And through this, we can really support a professional process that allows to translate different ideas and different perspectives. Through this, people, despite their differences, can work together towards a solution. At a local level, there are many examples that have been successful, and so this can be scaled up. But we need co-creation as an element of culture, and this is what we may miss today. Rahel, you can close this meeting. So you have to try and allow Wolfgang to believe in what we said. Well, it's not a question of making the capitalism more democratic. I think we have to pursue active capitalism criticism by offering alternatives. That's the only way. Wolfgang? So you have the floor again. Well, I don't think, and I go back to Michael and Rahel, I do not think co-creation, citizens' assembly, and many other forms, I do not think that this can be replicated at a broader level. But so it's a very nice ideal, it's very idealistic, but we should not forget that we live in a framework with multiple different interests, and these interests are away from co-creation. So the idea is that there are so many interests that are in conflict with one another. We can always try in smaller forms, for example, citizens' commissions. We can always try to work in a co-creative way, providing specific guarantees that decisions are made in a specific form. But this is far away from democratization. But as far as capitalism is concerned, well, under a certain viewpoint, we may be able to include some social aspects, but in this case, we would create, we cannot start a creative instruction that we finally need, because one thing is clear, a decrease in the economic growth will destroy the entire model and all the companies. We need economic growth, we need growth, and we need innovation. So we may criticize capitalism, but capitalism is an innovation machine that, despite all the victims, will remain in life and alive. Great. So next time we may invent a new innovation machine rather than capitalism. Let's think about this. But in the meantime, let's hope capitalism is not strengthened by the energy transition, because it has to be weakened. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you, and thank you for being with us from Berlin. Rahel is in London, right? Yes. Michael is in Potsdam. No, I'm in Frankfurt. Oh, I'm sorry. And Wolfgang, you are in Berlin, right? Yes. I'm finally in Berlin. Yes, I'm in Berlin. Yes. Good. So thank you. Thank you to the Fondazione for organizing this event in the framework of OkEurope, and see you next time. Bye-bye.